So I'm Rick Clow. I'm a partner at Google Ventures, responsible for the workshops that we do here. Today we're going to talk about meetings. Somebody was asking me about what we do here, the sort of stuff we focus on, and it occurred to me that one of the things I learned, I've been in this role now about 18 months, is that what we really try and focus on in picking topics to cover in workshops are extraordinarily tactical things. Like, it's not big picture strategy stuff. It's how to do better in your job today, tomorrow, next week, next month. And one of the things we hear pretty consistently from companies in the portfolio, something we certainly remember from our own time in startups, is that we're pretty bad at meetings. They don't go well. They're not efficient. They're not a good use of anybody's time. And they're often things to be regretted, avoided, and just not enjoyed. What I've found in now close to 6 years at Google is that there are certain teams for whom the meetings really were the thing that accelerated their execution. And I was talking to Ken about this after the PM workshop a couple of weeks ago, and we started really riffing on things that worked well from teams that we'd been a part of, and realized that there was actually quite a bit of substance here, that to both of us, as we were looking at the slides and putting this together, felt really, really obvious, but is only obvious in hindsight. It was not stuff that was obvious to us when we were at startups, and it was not even obvious on certain teams, and you end up learning a lot of this stuff the hard way. So what we're intending to cover today is how to have good meetings, how to create a culture within the company where there's shared understanding of what the purpose of a meeting is, and perhaps equally important, what it's not supposed to be. I think eliminating at least some of the toxic meetings from the standing agenda is going to be a really important outcome of this meeting. Common expectations across everyone in the company, whether the company is 4 people or 400, really doesn't make much of a difference. Helping everybody understand why they're there, why they're using that time is really important. There's a great sort of running joke in the open source community about bike shedding. Is anybody in the room familiar with the term bike shedding? So if you go to bikeshed.org, you can actually see some of the historical origins of the joke. But very briefly, it captures something that's a dynamic that you see all too often in meetings at companies. And the issue had to do with an atomic power plant where there was a room full of people, and there was a large proposal on the table about building another nuclear reactor. And another agenda item was for the workers who were biking to work from the community just off the main power campus. They were going to build a bike shed. There was no debate, relatively speaking, about the building of the nuclear power plant because it was so complex and it required so much understanding from so many different people that the assumption around the room was the experts who had prepared it had done their homework and knew what they needed to know, and they could bless that plan. The bike shed, on the other hand, was something so simple and so easy for them to all have an opinion on that they spent hours debating what color the bike shed should be, whether it should be made of wood or metal, should it have a roof, should it be solar powered, and it has now become a verb within Google that as discussions in a meeting start rat-holing on a particular trivial point, you're accusing the person of bike shedding the conversation. And the conclusion of the bike shed discussion is, you shouldn't care what color it is. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if it's blue, if it's red, if it's black, if it's natural. It will all serve the function. So somebody needs to make a decision and move on. The last thing I'll share before I hand it over to Ken to dive into the slides, and then I'm going to come back up towards the end and we'll take questions and answers. Relatively early in my PM days at Google, I was running Blogger, and you get in the habit of accepting invitations to standing meetings, right? Some team wants to keep everybody in the loop about something that's going on. So you say yes, and now it's on the calendar, and so we have a standing hour-long meeting every week, every 2 weeks. And pretty soon, about 4 or 5 months into my tenure, most of my Monday and all of my Tuesday were booked every week. So I knew coming into the office Monday morning, I wasn't really going to be doing productive work until Wednesday, every single week. I think it was May, we had a big product launch scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. So I show up Monday morning, I'm like, well, if I go to all these meetings, I'm going to be completely out of pocket. I'm not going to contribute anything to the launch, and I'm going to be, either not sleeping Monday night, or I'm not going to be doing my job. So I made a relatively rash decision. I said no to every single meeting on my calendar on Monday and Tuesday, and just got to work managing the launch, and we got the launch out on Tuesday. Something I realized was that nothing else happened. Nothing blew up because I didn't go to the standing meetings. Realized that week that a lot of the things that were occupying, at that point, about 40% of my week were not constructive uses of my time, and I wasn't moving anything forward. It was a lot of just keeping everybody in the loop, updating. Once I realized that, once I figured out that saying yes to the meeting was actually one of the worst decisions I could do, we started eliminating a lot of those standing meetings. So a lot of what Ken's going to talk about before diving into the how to have a good meeting is also about how to get rid of a lot of meetings. So with that, that's sort of the framing for what we're doing. A little bit of hygiene today. For those of you that have attended workshops in the past, we have a Google Doc that went out to all of you. We're going to be using that for Q&A. Those of you that are watching remotely, we will be queuing up questions so that we can tackle them towards the end. We've got about a minute delay here on the broadcast, so trying to do them actual real-time live is going to be a little tricky. So we're going to try and queue them all up, take questions towards the end. Those of you in the room, there is a mic here. Make sure the mic is on. Ask the question on the mic so that the folks who are watching online or on the recording can hear you. And I think, what did I forget? Is that it? All right, I think we're good. So with that, I'm going to be pushing buttons in the back. I'm going to turn it over to Ken, and we'll be back up to answer some questions towards the end. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Rick. So my name's Ken Norton. I've been at Google for about 6.5 years. I'm a product manager, and I came into Google by way of an acquisition. So a lot of this experience is from both experiencing what it's like at Google, as well as smaller companies, startups, and big companies. The title of this is Meetings That Don't Suck, and I'm going to do my best to make sure this workshop doesn't suck. Although that would be a good way to kind of teach by example, I suppose. I think the first thing that we started to think about as we were putting this talk together was that there are different kinds of meetings. And that's something that hadn't necessarily occurred to me earlier in my career, is that there are actually different kinds of meetings. And some meetings, by their very nature, are toxic. Just that very type of meeting is something that needs to be avoided. And there are other types of meetings, like, for example, one-on-ones with people on your team that are incredibly valuable, even unstructured. And so what I wanted to do was put together a framework that'll help you think about what type of meeting it is as you evaluate or intend to schedule something. And what we began to realize, and we'll have a copy of this little flow chart that we'll kind of refer back to during the talk, and we'll actually put it into the shared Google Drive, is that the most important kind of pivot point around what type of meeting you're looking at is whether or not there's a decision that needs to be made at that meeting. And so we're going to spend most of our time on the bottom part of this flow chart, which are how do you manage decision-making meetings. But I want to talk a little bit about the other types of meetings that fall into the not a decision-making fork. The decision-making meetings are the hardest ones. They tend to be the source of the biggest problems, as you find out that both decision-making meetings are kind of poorly run, as well as meetings that really should be decision-making meetings that aren't, are the source of a lot of the troubles. Let's talk a little bit about what the other kinds of meetings are. And what I'm going to propose up here is that as you look at this flow chart, if you say, I need to schedule a meeting, or we need to have a meeting, or I'm in a meeting, what kind of meeting is it? Is this a meeting where we need a decision? If the answer is no, I want you to evaluate it against these different types of meetings I'm going to talk about, and ask yourself, should we even be having this meeting? Do we need to have this meeting? The first kind of meeting that I think everybody thinks about when they think about meetings they hate are the update meetings. Let's all get together. Let's go around the room. Let's give an update. Kill these. They are terrible. When I started at Google, I joined a team that was growing very, very rapidly. And they had an established weekly cross-functional update meeting that I think was started with the best of intentions. It was started because we had different functions that were working closely with the team. We had engineering, we had marketing, we had consumer support. And we had a bunch of different groups, and somebody at some point said, we should probably have a meeting where every week we bring this group of people together and we kind of update each other. There's a couple problems with that. One was that decision was probably made when there were about 5 people that needed to be at that meeting. But as Google grew, as the team grew, at some point the meeting became 25, 30 people. And we only became introspective about it at the point where we said, we need to move to a bigger conference room because we've got too many people here. And we have people like sitting on the floor. And so we said, we need to find a bigger conference room. And somebody's like, do we really need to have this meeting? This meeting's terrible. We sit here for an hour while everybody does their little 5-minute update. And for the other, 58 minutes or 55 minutes, you're on your laptop, you're not paying attention. And what we started to discover is we don't need this meeting. This meeting is terrible. And that there are easy, obvious ways to replace this meeting. One way was through email snippets. So at Google, we have a system called Snippets, where once a week, you get an automated email from the system, and it says, reply with a bulleted list of what you did last week and what you want to do this week. And that goes into a little database that you can search, and that, importantly, you can subscribe to updates from. So you can go in there and say, I want to, once a week, get a little digest of everybody on my team or everybody on my project, or search for the following keywords and give me snippets. And that was such a more effective, less disruptive way to do the what's everybody working on. And we completely replaced that meeting with email snippets. Another way I'll talk about are with daily team stand-ups, which are incredibly effective. And that wasn't a good replacement in this case because there was like 30-something people in that meeting. But I'll talk about why stand-ups can also be an effective way to just kind of get a sense of what is everybody working on, what are we doing. The problem with update meetings, though, is there's usually somebody who will defend them to the death, because that is the only person that's actually getting value out of them. That could be the manager or the product manager or whomever it is that's actually listening to every single person's update and actually finds that meeting valuable. So it can be hard to kill these meetings sometimes. And the only really effective way to kill them is to propose another way to get that same information. So I wouldn't suggest going to your next update meeting and saying, update meetings blow, let's kill it, I'm out of here. Because somebody's going to say, hold on, I get a ton of value out of this meeting. This is really important for me. I need to know what everybody's working on. Great, here's another way to find out what everybody else is working on. That doesn't involve all of us sitting in a room, collectively wasting 30 hours of our time. So update meetings, I think generally, kill them, replace them. There's another whole kind of category of meetings, like strategy, offsite planning meetings, brainstorming, product planning meetings, design, UX reviews that I'm not going to talk about today because they can be incredibly effective, but they're also very specialized. So, for example, our UX team at Google Ventures is really effective at doing sprint meetings and kind of design reviews, and they have a whole kind of framework for that. So I don't intend to cover all of those. What I will say with these types of meetings, though, is they often hide what should be a decision-making meeting. So when you get an invitation that says, we just want to look at the latest mock-ups. It's just a design review. Is there a decision that's hiding behind that? Well, actually, yeah, we want your sign-off on whether we should keep going. Or we want you to pick between design A and design B. Great, OK, that's a decision-making meeting. Let's plan it like a decision-making meeting. These are particularly problematic when they have a regular format, right? So once a week, we do our planning meeting. OK, what decisions need to be made at this planning meeting? Or are we just kind of all getting together and looking at something and then not deciding on this urgent decision that needs to be made? So that is the one thing I would say about these types of meetings. Not going to go into too much depth on each of them. One of my favorite types of meetings are one-on-ones. So I would say that probably if you are a manager, certainly, or if you're a leader, they're probably the most important meetings on your calendar. The problem is they don't tend to be treated as such. They're often easy victims when you're trying to schedule something. And I used to be guilty of this a lot, where I would need to schedule something, and I would look at my calendar, and I would see all these different types of meetings, and I'd be like, oh, there's a one-on-one with Jim. Well, that's going to be easy to reschedule because it's just Jim, it's just me. He's a cool guy, and I'm just going to reschedule that. Or maybe we'll skip it this week. Don't do that. Or if you're going to reschedule it. Because one-on-ones with people that you work directly with are your best format for both connecting to that person, understanding what's driving them, what issues they might be having. But it's the best way to build relationships with people. You're going to have conversations in that one-on-one meeting that would never have been brought up anywhere else, either because the other people in the room or because it's not appropriate for email, or maybe it's not urgent enough where I'm going to ask to schedule a meeting with you. But one-on-ones need to be sacred. Another thing that I used to do, and I realized I was guilty of, is, I am or ask the person, hey, did you have any agenda items this week? Do we even need to meet? Okay, what is that saying when you're a manager and you say that to somebody on your team? So first of all, how are they going to answer that question, right? Like, well, maybe they have an agenda item, but probably they don't. And they're going to say, no, it's not important, right? Because they don't want to waste your time. But what you're saying to them is, hey, a half hour with you isn't as important as some other random thing I could be doing unless you give me a convincing reason why. That sends a pretty negative message to that person. And I've been on both ends of that. I've been guilty of it, but also been on the receiving end of it. And knowing that you have that regular forum with that person, either a colleague or a coworker or a manager or a direct report, lets you know that you have that forum for them. And it's your time to use however you want. And so just knowing that that time is available to you and it's taken seriously by that other person is incredibly energizing. And the other thing it does is it'll allow you to prevent other types of meetings, right? I mean, if I know I have a regular one-on-one with Amy and she needs a quick decision from me, she's just going to talk about it at the one-on-one. She's not going to schedule some other meeting or throw something on the agenda. She's going to be like, you know what, we'll pick it up at the one-on-one. We'll go into detail. The other thing that I started doing about 2 years ago is not having these one-on-one meetings in some stuffy conference room, but going outside and walking around. So I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. The first reason ended up driving the whole thing, which was it was impossible to get a conference room in the building I was in. So we were like, you know what, why don't we just go outside? I started to realize a couple things. One was it's nicer outside than it is inside, just in general. Number two, that I was getting some exercise, and so was the person I was with. But number three, there was something focusing about walking with someone else that created a very different dynamic than sitting and staring at each other in a room. And so maybe it was just commonly focused on something besides ourselves, walking in the same direction, whatever it was that made the conversation much more vibrant. And what hardly ever happened, that used to happen when we would sit in a room was, after 10 minutes or whatever, we're saying, I don't have anything else, I don't have anything else either. We would always use the full 30 minutes. There was always something to talk about, even if it was just, I got a new car, or, hey, did you see this movie? Just having that type of personal relationship with a coworker, it really made my life better and made me more effective at working with them, and vice versa. And so I would consider doing that because I think it, even if it's just go outdoors and sit down and have a cup of coffee if you don't want to or can't walk, but just, getting outside, creating a different environment for that person. And I would say that the third point I would make on one-on-ones is if you are the manager or the leader or the CEO or the founder, starting the one-on-one with the question, what can I do for you to make your life easier? Is a really effective way to run these one-on-ones. Not what's your agenda, but just, how you doing? What can I do to make your life easier? And consequently, on the other side of that, always going to your one-on-ones with an answer to that question, even if it's just silly, like, I've been waiting for a new display, my old one's broken, I can't get any work done. Little trivial things like that you probably wouldn't interrupt somebody for or send an email on, but when somebody asks you a question on one-on-one, what can I do to make your life easier, can be really valuable. So I won't spend much more time on one-on-ones, but I think they're incredibly important. And it took me a long time in my career to realize how valuable they were. Another type of meeting that it probably tends to be the kind of de facto style, although it may not be formalized in smaller companies, is the daily team stand-up. So the way we've done this at Google and on the teams I've been on is first thing in the morning, and that at Google means 11, is everybody stands in a circle in our cubes, or maybe sometimes we'd go outside, grab a cup of coffee, stand in a circle, and stand. Because the moment you sit down, the moment you become entrenched, the moment you know you're going to be there for a while, if you stand up, it's quick, and we go around, and we each answer 3 questions. One is, what did you accomplish yesterday? What are you going to accomplish today? And is anything standing in your way? So are there any roadblocks? And it's quick, right? We keep it very, very short. We've had stand-ups with, 10-person team go in 5 minutes, and they're done. This accomplishes a few things. One is, it serves the purpose of that stupid update meeting that you used to have once a week. And guess what? Now you're getting it daily, so you know what's going on even more effectively. It helps build a team culture. It gets you guys, you people facing each other and talking to each other. But it both sets the tone for making commitments to the team. So you say, you know what? When I go to startup tomorrow, like by golly, I want to have done that thing that I said I was going to do. It allows you to commit to the team, and it allows you to surface any roadblocks. So for me as a product manager, they were really effective because I sat and listened to that last question most particularly, which is, is anything standing in your way? I'm still waiting on so-and-so. Great, can I go talk to them for you? Or I still need, this person to finish their code and check it in before I can do this thing. So I'm actually blocked. Okay, great, what else should you do today? It allows other people to be, to be familiar with what other people are doing, and a lot of times these meetings would end with, hey, right after the meeting, let me talk to you about that because I can solve that problem for you. Or, actually let me take that from you because I think I can get it done faster. Why don't you do this? It also creates a forum where the entire team is together at a certain period of time. So anything else like quick decisions that need to be made or detailed conversations, you can always set to happen right after stand-up. So a lot of times we would say, I need to talk to you and so-and-so and this other person about why. Tomorrow right after stand-up, let's do it. I would often invite other people to come talk to us right after stand-up because I knew we were all going to be together. And somebody says, hey, I need to come talk to you and the team about our new privacy policy. Great, just come to stand-up. We're all going to be there right after stand-up. We can talk about it. So stand-ups are great. They work most effective for smaller teams. So 5 to 8 feels about right. Once you start getting kind of 15, 20 people, it's difficult for them to do effectively. Often you've now reached a point where it makes sense to do fewer, smaller stand-ups, right? So maybe now you have 30 people, but it's actually 4 or 5 different stand-ups because they're smaller sub-teams. But daily stand-ups are incredibly valuable, and you can learn a lot more about that online. I mean, the Scrum format for stand-ups is very similar too, but keep them informal and be very diligent about moving on. They can quickly kind of degrade into conversation or debate or technical design. Just say, great, let's table that, let's keep going, let's get everybody's updates, and then after the meeting we can talk about it. Another type of meeting that's really effective is the all hands, and at Google we have several different types of regular all hands meetings. One is we have TGIF, which is used to be held every Friday. It's now held every Thursday for us here on the West Coast because it's Friday for most everybody else in the world, where Larry and Sergey and Eric, or some combination of them, get up in front of the entire company and both give us interesting updates and demos of upcoming product launches, but equally as important, take questions. And so that creates a forum for communicating to the entire company, getting together, celebrating launches, successes, asking difficult questions. It creates kind of an openness and a culture of, hey, no matter what happens, I know I can get up to that mic at TGIF and ask Larry why it was done. And those are really effective. There's other types of ones we do too at different intervals. So we have an Eng all hands that's once a quarter. It's kind of a similar format. If anybody has seen Rick's talk on OKRs, objectives and key results, we have an OKR meeting every quarter where the company talks about what our OKRs are for the quarter. So I would look for ways to do that. Your company, it could just be to follow the TGIF model every Friday. At 4 o'clock, we get some drinks and we sit around and we do it. Maybe it needs to be more formal or a different interval, but those are really valuable. One suggestion I would make is to rotate the planning responsibility. It can kind of very easily fall into some person's purview to just plan that thing, and it's a lot of work. I've actually planned an all hands to help out. And it took me a lot of work to kind of organize everybody, get the slides, figure out what the topics were going to be, get the room. It may be less work at a smaller company, but still, kind of rotate it. It allows you to have a much more kind of diverse format to it, and also gives everybody a chance to do some organization. And then, always take Q&A. There's no reason why you shouldn't just have open conversation and question and answer with the team. Okay, so this brings us to decision making. So again, like I said, that fork on, is this a decision making meeting or not? There are alternatives up there. There are good types of meetings, but hopefully the answer in this situation is, yeah, you know what, we need a decision, or we thought we didn't, but now we know we did. Great. How do we plan that? The first thing is, what are the decisions that need to be made? So the first question I would often ask is, can it even wait for a meeting, right? Like is somebody completely blocked? Are we in crisis mode? Is somebody just going to be kicking back and waiting on this decision? Can we make the decision sooner? Does it even need a decision? A lot of times you'll have people who think maybe they need somebody to make a decision, and the answer is, you make the decision, decide for yourself. Or, you know what, it sounds like the three of you are coming to me already having made the decision, just do it. So a lot of times my first question will be, do we even need to meet on this? Can we decide with just the right people in the hallway or after stand-up? Or, is this something that the decision's kind of already been made and you just want to communicate it? The best types of decisions are formatted in a kind of clear and unambiguous way, and I'll show you a couple examples, and specific, right? So ideally it is something that you say yes or no, right? We record our decision, it was yes or no, or maybe a third one, which is, we held off because we're waiting for more information, or, the decision was, we're going to come back next week and we're going to look at some additional information. So here are a few examples. Again, referring back to the OKR talk, which I highly recommend everybody see, they're phrased like good OKRs are. They're specific, they're measurable, they're actionable. So some of the examples on the left that I think are good ones are, we're going to meet because we want to pick one of these three designs. Or we want permission and approval to launch this thing. Or we have this big contract, we're going to review the contract, and we want a yes or no, should we sign it? Some other ones that are kind of bad examples that may feel like good decision-making meetings are, we want to review the mock-ups. Okay, what's the decision you want made? You want to just show them to us? Or, well, actually, no, we want your feedback on whether we're in the right direction, or we want to know whether we should even be doing this at all, or we want permission to start engineering. Okay, great, that's a decision. A lot of times you'll say, we need to decide on a launch strategy, or we need to determine a course of action. Be more specific. What is the decision that you want? This can be problematic in these kind of regular review meetings. Like, we'll have a contract review once a week. We're going to look at the contracts. Okay, great. What's the decision that needs to be made? Well, we need to know if Happy can we sign the contract as termed, or so-and-so is asking for this amendment. Do we agree or not? So as important as what decision needs to be made is, who is the decider? Going back to the bike shedding example that Rick was giving, you may have a really crisp decision that needs to be made, but unless you're clear on who the decider is and who the reviewers are, which we'll talk about in a second, you're prone to bike shedding. The problem with that bike shedding example is there was nobody who said, I made a decision, the bike shed is red, let's move on. There is a really good workshop that Dan Shapiro did where he talked about designing a corporate culture, and he realized that they had reached a point where he knew that they were making progress as a company because he needed to start making decisions. He needed to start being the one to make the call. So the characteristics of a decider are, they are the person who can block execution, right? So you need them. You need their approval. One is best. It rarely works well to have more than one. Sometimes you may have a couple, never more than 3 or 4. You need to establish this really early in the project. So everybody looking around the room wondering who the decider is not going to make for an effective decision-making meeting. Nominate the decider, make it clear, everybody knows who that decider is. And I think more importantly is, if there's disagreement, escalate. We have a great engineering leader here at Google, Ors, who says, There's nothing wrong with escalation. Escalation is good because it speeds up decision making. So don't be afraid to escalate. Don't frown upon it. Don't discourage it. If there's disagreement, escalate. Somebody will make the call. Somebody will make the decision. What's more important than whether or not you should escalate or not is not slowing down decision making. Nothing should slow down make people making bad compromises or having disagreements or having this kind of festering frustration or disappointment or disagreement. If it's not clear on who the decision maker is, escalate. Somebody will make the decision. The last point I think is really important, which is the decider isn't necessarily the most senior person, right? Or in many cases, it shouldn't be. So don't make the mistake of saying, okay, that's our CEO. So at Google, ultimately, Larry is the decider. He's the CEO. But I can tell you there's a hell of a lot of meetings that we have where Larry's not in the room and making a decision. That's what our organization is for. If you have a healthy organization, everybody is probably a decider at some point on something, right? It could just be something as simple as, how we format a configuration file. And the expert engineer on that is the decider in that case. It could be a design review where you have a UX designer who's going to make the call. So don't fall into the trap of assuming this just means that there's one person who is ruling like a royal kingdom and needs to be a part of every single meeting. That's not the case. The decider is the person who can block execution. So there's another category of people called reviewers. And this is really important that you draw this distinction. So I think that this is something that I learned at Google that I was never clear on in the past, and I realized was the source of a lot of the pain that I had with meetings. Reviewers are people who have valuable input, but can't and shouldn't block execution. And reviewers are people who probably should do most of their work ahead of the meeting. So, if you're writing a technical design document and you need a decision made on whether to proceed or not, most of the reviewers are going to give their feedback ahead of time. They're going to be reviewing the design document. You're going to be consulting with them. You're going to meet with whoever's responsible for security. You're going to think about who does operations. And these people are going to give you their input mostly ahead of the meeting. And hopefully for that decision-making meeting, either not attending because they don't need to be there at this point, or maybe sending one nominee or one representative. So being clear on who the reviewers is allows, for example, a team of people that may have a function to just say, you know what, we don't all 5 of us need to be there. We gave our feedback to this person, and they're going to represent us in the meeting. The final thing is your job is not to make all the reviewers happy. You won't always make all the reviewers. You can't make all the reviewers happy. Your job is to take their input into account, is to consider it, but to move forward and to get a decision from the decider. And so if you are the reviewer, your options are to agree and say, great, thumbs up, let's move forward, you don't need me anymore. To disagree, and when you disagree, that means escalating, saying, you know what, I don't like this. I'm going to escalate this, and we're going to get a decision. And again, nothing wrong with escalation. That's how you keep the wheels moving. Or what you may sometimes do is, just set your differences aside and commit. Say, you know what, as you know, I have issues with that, but I'm on board. Let's move forward. What you cannot do is pocket veto, right? Is to passive resistance. Is just stall and block and do everything you possibly can to slow down progress or to stop the launch. That is not an option. That is toxic, and that'll kill your organization. Nothing wrong with escalation. Nothing wrong with disagreeing and saying, you know what, I disagree, but you're going to move forward. I'm not the decider. What you can't do is just, stall, delay. Passive resistance is terrible. So again, being able to, for each of these meetings, decision-making means you're going to say, this is who the decider is. These are the reviewers that need to be there. And this is a decision that needs to get made. It's going to go a long way toward making that meeting a lot more effective. So, okay, now I know this is the decision that needs to be made. It's phrased properly. It looks great. Here's the decider. Here are the reviewers. I'm going to prepare an agenda because I want these people to come to the meeting prepared and understanding what the meeting's all about. I've started to pick up on some things that some great leaders at Google have done, which is there's no agenda, there's no meeting. I'm not going to show up to the meeting if you don't tell me what it's about and what the agenda is. And you know what? I encourage other people to do the same. That creates a culture of accountability for meetings. Like, at Google, something doesn't just show up in your calendar without any indication of what it's about or any notes about what decisions need to be made or just with a rant. I mean, that used to happen to me at other companies. It would just be like, meet about mystery. Like, what? What is this? Well, I guess I'll go find out. No, I'm not going to go. Tell me what the meeting's about. A good agenda is going to outline the decisions that you need, who the decider is, links to materials. And this is really important because you want people to do as much work ahead of time as they possibly can. So, I have seen agendas go out and say, our meeting is to discuss this, and here's a decision that needs to be made, here's a link to the materials, and have people basically said, you know what, we don't need to meet. I decided, like, it's good, go forward. Thanks for sending it out. We don't need to meet. I'm not going to stop you. That's good. That means things are working as intended. What you shouldn't do, and I think this is sometimes an impulse when your meeting culture is off track, is to say, well, I don't want anybody, like, I want to save it all up for the meeting, right? Because I don't want to get random comments, or I don't want people to, like, have time to, like, no. If things are working well, you want people to come to the meeting as prepared as possible. You want all the comments. You want to have, maybe you had 5 decisions, and by the time it's meeting time, there's only 1 left. That's great. So let's look at an example. So I created this kind of fictional example, but I actually based it off of a real agenda format that somebody I work with sends out. So it starts with when it is. Here are the things we're going to do, and you can look. There's links in this. So when I get this thing, the first thing I do is click on all those links. I look at them. I review the decks. I review the mock-ups. I review the specs. Here's a decision that needs to be made. Approval to begin development on redesign. Here's the decider. Here are the reviewers. And I know what this meeting's about. I know when it's going to be. I can do my preparation. At Google, we always send out the preparation material ahead of time. Like, what's the presentation you're going to see? When you do presentations to senior execs, you're expected to send it out the day before so that they can look at it, they can familiarize us, they can prepare what questions they may have. There was a recent article, I think in Fortune magazine, about how Jeff Bezos at Amazon runs his leadership meetings. And he starts by handing out things for the group to read, and they all sit there quietly for the first half hour of the meeting and read. So that's a different way to do it, but the end result is the same, is that we are all going to start this discussion. We're going to make this decision together, having been as informed as possible so that the meeting can be effective. And so that we're all kind of on the same page, so to speak. So that's a good example. How long is the meeting? This is an area where I think people tend to get pretty lazy. I worked for a company where it was always 60 minutes. Every meeting was 60 minutes, right? It's just like that was the default. It's a 1-hour meeting. And there's no reason why 1 hour needs to be the default. Of course, you're going to have 1-hour meetings, but try making 30 minutes your default. See what happens. I think you'll find out that you have a lot shorter meetings that are just as effective as they were, if not more effective than before. One thing that we've started doing at Google is actually chopping that up even a little bit more. 20 minutes instead of 30 as the default, 40 instead of 60. Gives people better time to transition between meetings if they need to, especially here on Google where sometimes you have to walk for a ways. It also just, again, is a kind of another subtle nudge of, we're going to try to be as efficient, as effective as possible. We're not going to waste people's time. 30 minutes is all we need. So I would say be considerate of what your default is. You can always decide to make a meeting longer if you need, but it's very hard to make it shorter. I think what tends to happen is the conversation just fills the time allotted. It's a very hard discipline to get into. It's very hard to say, hey, we're done, let's get out of here. I think you're like, oh, we're here for an hour, we might as well draw the conversation out. And then when to schedule the meeting. So the first thing is as soon as possible, right? Because you don't want to be delaying decisions unnecessarily. And this goes back to my earlier point of, if you can't have the meeting till next week, is that even an option? Is that going to hold things up? Is that too long? Can we find another way to make the decision? Some things to be considerate of when you're doing the scheduling. Paul Graham has a great essay called Managers versus Makers about the different ways that managers run their calendar and their time versus engineers and people who are building, and how disruptive it is to have that kind of context switching for an engineer versus for a manager when that's kind of your job a lot of times to go from meeting to meeting. So I think the first thing is to be considerate of the time of day that you're holding the meeting. The second thing I would say is look for ways to defrag your meeting schedules. If you have 3 regular team meetings that happen at different times of day with 1 hour between them, can you stack them up or maybe break them out so that people aren't going from an hour of work time to an hour of meetings to 2 hours of work time to an hour of meetings. Much better to have a 2-hour block of meetings and then have the rest of the afternoon for being able to do work. One thing that we've done, I think since the very early days at Google, is try to have a no meeting day. So no meeting Thursdays for most. Just everybody puts it on their calendar, and it's kind of taboo to schedule on a Thursday. If you schedule on a Thursday, you better have a really damn good reason for it, because people are going to say, hold on a minute, that's no meeting Thursdays. So that's a good both way to ensure that you have that kind of full block no matter what happens, but it's a good way to kind of institute in the culture that we're going to be vigilant about not having unnecessary meetings. That our default is we don't need to meet unless proven otherwise. Beware of recurring meetings. I gave the example in the beginning of that weekly meeting we had, and there was just that kind of inertia of it was just there, it was on the calendar, we all hated it, but it was just much harder to defeat than it was to just go to every week. A little trick that I started to do that has actually kind of been one way to address that is when you set up a new recurring meeting, and certainly this is the case in Google Calendar, you can have it, what's the end date, indefinite. Set an end date 6 months from now. And worst comes to worst is you renew it. You go, this is a good meeting, it's useful, let's keep it going. More likely than not, it'll force you to consider, is this meeting still useful? Is it still happening on the right time of day? Are the right attendees there? It's kind of a regular audit, just like you're supposed to change your smoke alarm batteries every time you change your clocks. It's a good way to kind of just audit your calendar and say, what, I don't think we need this meeting anymore. Or, we have this meeting in the afternoon, but like half people now are in New York. Maybe we should change the time. And then finally, you want the meeting to happen as soon as possible, but you also do want to make sure people have the time to prepare. So, try to balance those two of we want to get the decision quickly, but meeting right now when nobody's prepared is almost going to be even worse than meeting tomorrow, which may delay the decision, but it gives everybody a chance to understand everything that we're deciding from. So talk a little bit about just different technologies and tools, and I'm sure different people have used different things, and I'd love suggestions. Here are just some that Rick and I thought about. The first one is Google Docs are incredibly valuable. I mean, we're using them here for these workshops, but for ongoing kind of meeting notes and shared docs, there's a couple areas where I've found them to be useful. One is they're a great way to get comments ahead of time. So I can send out a doc that details what it is that we're talking about and decisions that need to be made, and people can comment in line. So we can kind of go into the meeting already having answered a lot of those questions, already even maybe having made some of the decisions, with everybody already having kind of given their input, reviewers having given their comment, deciders knowing what everybody's perspective is. We're ready to go. We're going to make a decision. They're great for regular meeting notes, and I'll show you an example in a little bit where we have that regular design review, and every week we go into the doc and we start typing from the top, and we copy and paste the action items from last time, and we make sure that we address them, and everybody can go and see everything that was discussed. And when a new member joins the team, they can kind of go back and read and say, oh, this is what the people have been talking about for the last X months. Google Plus Hangouts, video conferencing. What Rick and I were actually talking this morning. Both of us have been at Google long enough where we watch the shift from primarily audio remote conference calls to video, and it was huge. Right? We're a pretty global organization. We, I think, probably have always been working with different teams in different parts of the world. But when we went from that audio conference call where you can't see everybody, and you don't even know how many people are on the call, and it's easy to just kind of sit there and talk without realizing you've got all these people around the world whose time you're using. To be able to go to video conferencing, we used Google Plus Hangouts with video conferencing systems, to be able to see that, to be able to see, hey, maybe we should wrap up. There's like 15 people sitting in a room there in Zurich who are looking bored because we're talking about something unrelated to them. Let's end the meeting. Creates just a better environment. So, that's been huge. That's a great shot. That's made it much more effective to be a remote employee. I mean, even just to be able to kind of, raise your hand so people can see and be like, oh, we have a question out there, as opposed to like trying to interrupt on the audio call. That's terrible. Great for screen sharing. It's really, really easy using Hangouts to have somebody remote just take control of the screen and present some slides or do a demo. And that handoff is incredibly seamless, and it used to be very, very frustrating and very impossible. Uber Conference for phone meetings, one-click call recording. That's something that's kind of really valuable for that service, is to be able to maybe even kind of record the call if you're the meeting organizer and you're like, I want to make sure I really capture some of these issues and I can go back and listen to it later. And of course, good old-fashioned whiteboards, Post-its. One of the members of our UX team was giving some feedback ahead of this meeting on the topic, and they said, I just want to make sure something's always being captured. Always capture something. No matter what's going on, somebody's always writing in a doc or writing on a whiteboard or putting Post-its up so that we're archiving the information that's being exchanged, and we are together capturing something, even if it's just a name, even if it's just writing down keywords that people are saying. Another thing that they love on our team, and those of you who've seen, who've either worked with our UX team or seen some of our talks, know about this time timer. But Jake on our UX team was telling us, is like just having this thing in the middle of the table has this magical effect on the meeting, right? Suddenly people become a lot more conscious of the time, but also kind of create some urgency, right? And these have been so effective for them, particularly in kind of design sprints where you just kind of can kind of go on forever. They actually are like, they've actually hoarded them. They bought a whole bunch of them. They're like handing them out because they found these things are so effective. So little tools like that, can be really valuable as well. Again, another thing is just standing. Be like, hey, this meeting's going to be short because we're going to make a quick decision. We're going to stand because we don't want to get too comfortable here. We want to get out of here quick. It's during the meeting. Start on time. I'm continuously amazed that Google is a place where meetings start on time. If you're in the conference room, you're going to get a knock on the door and you're going to get out because the next meeting's coming in. You're not going to just get to kind of go over by 10 minutes. That just becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Where it's like, well, nobody will be there at 3, so I'm not going to be there at 3. I'll show up at 3:05, and then everybody's like, well, they won't start on time anyway. I'll get there at 3:10, and suddenly you have this culture of nothing ever gets done on time, nothing ever starts on time, and then it fulfills itself. End early. I've been guilty of this, right? Where I've said, okay, we've got another 20 minutes. What should we talk about? No, the right answer is, okay, we're done. Let's get out of here early, right? Unless there are other decisions that have not been made yet, there's no reason to sit in there for another 20 minutes just because you scheduled the meeting for an hour. You're done. Get out. Laptops in meetings, we haven't talked about this yet, but it used to drive me crazy in these update meetings, which is everybody's on their laptop. So what I would say is try this test. Look at all the meetings in your calendar and say, for this meeting, can I reasonably request that everybody in that meeting keep their laptop closed? And if the answer is no, ask yourself, do you really need this meeting? Or are all these people really required at that meeting, right? Because what you're saying to yourself is, no, it wouldn't be fair of me to ask them to just sit there for an hour and not get more important work done. Okay, well, maybe they shouldn't be at that meeting, or maybe this meeting isn't worthwhile for anybody, right? If it's a good decision-making meeting, or it's a valuable meeting, it's reasonable to say, hey, you know what? No laptops for this meeting. We're making an important decision. We're all here for a good reason, right? We shouldn't have any distractions. So when people complain about how do we get people to stop being on their laptop in the meeting, a lot of times that's symptomatic of another problem, which is they probably have something better to be doing and somewhere better to be. So let them go there. Stick to the agenda. When you have a good agenda, it's easy to stick to the agenda. It's easy to say, you know what? That's a really good point. Like we should probably follow up on that, or let's take that let's take that offline, or I think you're right. That's another decision that we need made. The right people are in the room. We'll get that decision made. Back to the point from earlier. Always be writing something down, capturing something. Maybe you have a Google Doc open. You're projecting it. Maybe you're just writing on a whiteboard. make sure everyone is heard. So this is both a remote employee kind of thing, right? Where whoever is remote is probably going to have a harder time being heard. It's kind of up to you as the meeting organizer to make sure that happens. Make sure the quieter people get voice. Make sure the loud people don't kind of dominate. That's another dynamic that's important to make sure you as kind of the organizer say, hey, you know what? Did you have something we haven't heard from you, or actually this person's a reviewer and they've been sitting there quiet. I want to hear what they have to say. And that's meeting facilitation is a skill that can be developed, but just don't let the meeting kind of drive itself. So what do good notes look like? So the types of things I always want to capture on meeting notes are who was there, put it in a place where everybody can get to it later, so a shared Google Doc, public to the, at Google, like all this stuff, public to the entire company, right? I want to share, I want to be able to go and find out what that team's working on and what they talked about their last meeting. New people join the team, they should be able to kind of go back and say, oh, here's all the stuff they talked about, now I'm up to speed. Don't transcribe, like this isn't you're not a court recorder, you're not trying to transcribe every single conversation. You might think that is better from information capture, but it's impossible to look at later. So capture the salient points, any action items that came out of it, the decisions that got made, right? What was the decision? Rick was right to point out that a lot of times you have meetings where you capture a decision, but then you go back later and you can't remember either why you decided what you decided or what you thought was going to happen, right? So we encourage capturing expectations, right? So we made this decision, and here's what we think is going to happen as a result of that. So I'll show you an example. So imagine this is a weekly meeting. Every week at the top of it we start typing. The old weeks go to the past. Who was in the meeting? What did we talk about? Why are we here talking about it? Well, we're trying to simplify the cancellation process because it's frustrating for users. Okay, great. What is the decision that we needed made? Well, we want approval to launch. Okay, well, what do you think is going to happen when we launch? Well, the reason we want to launch is because we're hoping to see a 50% decrease in tickets, right, or customer support. Okay, great. Here's the decision, another action item that came out of it. Now we can go back later and say, maybe even next week, hey, last week we decided to launch the new cancellation experience. How's it going? Oh, well, we expected to see a 50% decrease in cancellation tickets. It's still early, but so far we see 40%. We think that's good, right? Or no, it's not as good as we thought it was going to be. Should we revisit the decision? So having this archived and captured both allows you to very crisply communicate what happened in the meeting, what decisions were made, but also allows you to go back and, believe me, you will want to go back maybe even years in the future and say, why did we decide to do that? What did we think was going to happen? Why? I remember that decision, but I don't remember the rationale for it. And then after the meeting, confirm it, circulate the action items, make the notes available. But this is an important one. Get feedback from the people that are in the meeting, particularly for these regular recurring meetings. Is this still useful? Should we have it more frequently, less frequently? Are the right people here? Do you think you still need to be here? Is there somebody we're missing? Calendar invite that recurs every week doesn't automatically figure out who should be there and who shouldn't be there. And sometimes it can be hard to recognize the fact that there's somebody who's probably should be there, it's not there, that maybe didn't used to be when you scheduled it. And then what are the different types of problems? So this is kind of just a list, but it should spur a conversation. We're going to start Q&A in a couple minutes, but these are all types of things that Rick and I have seen and experienced, and you probably have too. So one is just, we don't know what decision needs to be made, or it's vague, or everybody thinks a different decision needs to be made. So the decision is important. We don't know who the decider is. I've had a lot of meetings where we all kind of in the room, and then we realize that we're not going to get anywhere because the real decider is not in the room, or we can't figure out who the decider is. Okay, well, that's an action that needs to be done before we meet. We identify the decider. We talked a little bit about reviewers think they're deciders, escalating, being clear on who's a reviewer, who's a decider. As a reviewer, making that kind of social contract with the team that you're going to give your input, but ultimately you're not going to try to block it, or if you need to block it, you're going to escalate. Wrong people in the room, missing, over-inviting certain people, forgetting other people, wrong representatives. Not sharing what happened in the meeting. You know, it's like, well, if you made a decision, let everybody know, right? Put it up there, make it available, communicate it, you know, send it out. At least make the notes and the documents available for people that want to go hunting for it. You know, as your company grows, you know, all those different, you know, exponential points of communication, you know, are going to result in a lot of confusion. I mean, at Google, to be able to kind of search around and say, hey, there's a team working on that. Oh, and here's their weekly notes. And oh, look, they're talking about that exact same problem. I should connect with them. To the point around expectations, you know, we captured the decision we made, but we have we didn't decide what we thought was going to happen as a result of that. Why did we make that decision? What did we hope was going to happen that was going to be for the better? And then later on, can we go back and measure that and say, we were right, it's better, we made the right decision, or you know what, let's revisit that. And then there's just this, like, you know, this inertia. I mean, you look at your calendar and you're like, all these meetings are on my calendar just because they've always been on my calendar, and you know, do they really need to be there? You know, can somebody step up and say, you know, I've got a better idea. Rather than everybody meeting for an hour, why don't we try sending out email updates? And you know, I'm gonna step up and try to make it happen, and we're gonna give it a few weeks, and we're gonna see what happen. I won't quite guarantee it, but I will propose that if you choose to cancel a meeting, a regular update meeting, for an alternate method, that it's very unlikely that a few weeks later people are going to vote that they want to have the meeting back. Another one too is just, you know, people voting with their feet, right? I mean, if you're at that meeting, it's like nobody shows up anymore, or everybody kind of shows up late, or you know, that's a signal to you that that meeting's not probably right, or the right attendees aren't there. I mean, people are just routinely come late, they're on their laptops. I mean, these are signals to you about this meeting. So that's it for the prepared remarks. We should go to Q&A, and we have a little bit of a delay between the video and live audience, but Rick's going to come up and join me. So we've got the questions here. There's a couple of them. The first one is the instituting unplugged meetings, no phones, computers. I think I touched on that a little bit, but like I said initially, you know, if you can't reasonably ask people to close their laptops and put their phones away, then you know, you should reconsider whether or not you even want to have that meeting. And you know, I don't think that, you know, there should necessarily be a hard and fast rule. Like, you know, I think there may be meetings where you say, you know what, these people are probably here because, you know, it's useful for them, and sometimes they might have questions, and you know, not having them in the room is worse than having them in the room, but I also can't really ask them to not do anything else. But I think in generally, if you can't fairly say to everybody, this is a closed laptop meeting, you should reconsider why that meeting exists.
Yeah, I mean, I think about, I remember being at a startup where being in the room was seen as the credential. Like if you were part of the meeting, you were in that crowd, you were part of that group, you were part of the team, and that was somehow a badge of honor. And that's totally the wrong way to look at it. Like if your input is needed, or you are a reviewer, or you are the decider, you should be in the room. If you're not, you shouldn't be in the room. Like you're wasting your time, you're wasting everyone else's time. Prioritize, make time, and go make stuff. Go do your job, go be productive. The productivity in the meeting is only if you are helping get to the decision, right? Or helping avoid making the wrong decision. That's productive, useful time in the meeting. Other than that, get yourself out of the meeting, right? Larry Page, in resuming the role of CEO a couple of years back, sent out an email on a couple of different subjects, but one of which was about, you know, you now are delegated the authority to remove yourself from any meeting that is not productive. Like just walk out, right? There is not going to be any penalty. No one's going to dock you or shun you. Like if it is not a useful use of your time, get out. I used to live in my inbox, so I always had this nagging fear, like, oh God, I've got 4 new emails waiting for me, or my phone is chirping. Or be present in the meeting, help get to the decision, and move on. And if your time is better spent managing your inbox, then go sit at your desk and manage your inbox. Don't sit in the room and try and multitask, because you're not getting your full attention on the meeting, and you're also not actually efficiently managing your inbox. And
that I think that email from Larry helped also, you know, solidify this culture we have of meeting skepticism, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, the default is prove to me why we need that meeting, not, I'll try to convince you that we don't, or, oh, it's just on my calendar, so I'll go. And so that kind of creates this healthy tension of like, if I'm going to invite some people to a meeting, like, I better demonstrate to them ahead of time that it's worth their time. And so that means a good agenda and a good reason why they need to be there. And, and not like people, still refuse. I mean, if you give people a good reason to have a meeting, they're going to come, but they're going to start with the, why does this need to be a meeting? Or what are we talking about? Or really, do we need a full hour? What about a half hour?
Yeah, and I think the some corollary to one of the points that Ken made in the slides about capture the expectations, right, in the meeting notes, so that you can codify, we're making this decision because we think we're going to achieve X. That was something that came out of my time at YouTube, where we were doing constant experiments on the homepage. We're going to go to 4 thumbnails instead of 3, or we're going to make them bigger, or we're going to go 2 lines on the description to see if it improves click-through, or we're going to try a featured video panel on the right. Whatever we were trying, I wanted to document the thing we thought we were going to make happen, both to keep ourselves honest and accountable to the decisions we were making, but I also wanted to be able to reward the person who'd done the work that produced the desired outcome. Because one of the other things that became obvious is that meetings became a way for people to get noticed, right? And that's not a good use of a meeting. Like, all hands meetings are good for that. But decision making, which turn into updates, which turn into somebody like, I've got 5 minutes, I've got the floor, I want to make sure that people know that I've been contributing. Like, that's not a great vehicle for that. So what I would end up doing is I would generally send out emails to the entire YouTube team or the YouTube leadership or our larger product and engineering team, where I would document like, hey, 2 weeks ago we made this change on the homepage, we thought we were going to do X, we actually did 3X, congrats to Brett who built that. And make sure that he gets the credit and the kudos for that. And suddenly we started seeing engineers sort of pull themselves out of meetings, right, and say, you don't need me in that meeting. I'd rather be sitting at my desk actually doing productive work. And suddenly the attrition within the meeting attendance was great. Like we cut about 1/3 of the people out of the room without anybody feeling like they were being penalized. So it's like, you're more than welcome to sit in the room. But once they started seeing that they were getting acknowledged and recognized for their work and their contribution, suddenly being in the room was not exciting anymore. Like, I'm not sure it was ever exciting, but it was certainly clear to folks on the team that there were other ways to get the thing that they wanted out of the meeting. Yeah. There was a question here on good ways to escalate. Yelling always works. I find that's, loud voice.
I think that it's important that escalation not be seen as, a personal attack, but as just a productive way to make things move faster, right? So to say, you know what, I'm really concerned, hey, you asked me to review this because I'm the security reviewer, and, I need to say, like, I'm incredibly concerned about this, and I'm just worried about it, so why don't we get together with, whoever the right decider is, right? And just raise it with them, right? So a lot of times the escalation is a new decision-making meeting with a new decider, right? And maybe that's the CEO, or maybe it's just senior. And I think that one of the things that I really like about Google is that escalation isn't seen as a political maneuver or a punitive way to like screw somebody else over. It's seen as a way to try to help as much as possible get to a quick decision, right? Because a lot of times you can escalate in a way that is a little bit more friendly by just saying, somebody above my pay grade, needs to make the call. Like, be self-deprecating about it. Be like, actually, I don't have the power to say no, but I need to tell you that there's some concerns, and we should probably get in front of the person who can make that right decision.
A couple of thoughts on that. We're going to do a separate workshop on lawyering up, because that ends up being a whole set of fascinating topics that are worth exploring in more detail. But I will note, when you are escalating, sometimes the issue you are concerned about, worried about, calling attention to, is a potentially sensitive issue, right? You're concerned that there might be regulatory oversight. You're concerned that there may be some depending on the size of your company or the space that you're in, there may be some anti-competitive issues, or any number of reasons that could trigger you desiring to escalate. If it is at all legally sensitive, take the escalation offline. Do not start a sent a thread in email raising, if you may or may not be a lawyer, but don't raise the issue, trigger a whole nother thread that is itself discoverable if this ever came to litigation. Escalate it, call the person, walk to their room, right? Go see them, sit at their desk, have the conversation. At some point, you want to document the decision that got made. You want to be able to acknowledge, we forked this discussion so that we could have another decision. Now we're bringing it back in and resolving. But don't in escalating it create a bigger problem for the company. That's never good. I think to Ken's point, the wonderful thing about Google is that this dovetails with another thing we prioritize, and we've talked about this in past workshops. Failing fast is awesome. Like if you can fail and get data that the thing that you decided to do is not working, that's great. So the quicker you can get to the decision, the quicker you can fail or see that you're on a path to success. So most people who do escalate are doing so to get you to that place faster, which is great. And I don't think I ever felt like somebody was pulling rank on me when they escalated something. It was because there was a genuine concern that there was an issue there.
And that's a good point about I'm going to escalate this because I don't want to hold you up, right? We shouldn't debate this for the next 2 weeks. Let's get a decision. And then, I think the other part of it is it's a lot of times this is a good opportunity for just negotiation, right? Which is, hey, my biggest concern is that your UI flow is broken in the following manner. Okay, well, I promise we will fix that in the next release after launch. Okay, great. I'm not going to hold you up. I just want to make sure my issues are being considered. I'm not going to block I'm not going to go raise it and escalate it. I just want to make sure that my concerns are being considered. Here at Google, we have, security and like operations reviews and production reviews, and they go of that format, right? Where I've never had one that needed to be escalated. They're reviewers, but they've given me very careful, considerate, detailed feedback, and I've taken it to heart. And then ultimately, that's kind of where it's gone. And if they needed to, they could escalate it, but they don't need to.
Yeah. I'm going to run back. Our screen went dark up here. If there are questions in here, feel free to grab the mic and just shout out. One comment on notes that I think is worth calling attention to, Ken alluded to this, the archival benefit and institutional memory benefit of documenting this stuff as a general matter of course is phenomenal. You bring a new team member on tomorrow, next week, next month. One of the things they're going to want to do early on is just spend an afternoon, an evening, a weekend getting up to speed. There is no better way to get a sense of the velocity of an organization, the culture of how decisions get made, the personalities of people involved, to go back through the last few months of what product decisions got made, what hiring decisions got made, what things have we met about, how often do we meet. That person's going to get up to speed way faster than any training or onboarding exercise that you could do with somebody. And the sooner this is part of the regular discipline of you have a meeting, you take notes, they're stored in Google Docs is generally obviously how we do it at Google, but whatever method is simplest for you, then that's available to the entire team. Like this transparency thing that we talk about a lot, and you've heard us talk in multiple contexts, is real. I can right now go back there and pull up team meeting notes from just about any team at Google and see what they've been up to this week, last week, week before, month before, year before. And if I'm so inclined to understand what their priorities are, what decisions they're making, I can dig in. And it's not surprising when, as a PM on a particular product, you hear from somebody you've never met on a team you don't even know exists in an office that you've never been to, who says, hey, I saw your notes from this thing last week. I actually know somebody at the company you're trying to figure out how to work with. I'd be happy to make an intro. And that only happens when you're regularly capturing this institutional memory and making it available. Any questions here? And then I'll run back to see if we've got any more questions on the broadcast. All right, I'll be right back real quick and see.
Yeah, it's Rick's point about
no more questions on the doc. Thank you.
Okay. Well, just one more thing, and then we can close. But your comment about just the kind of institutional memory is, in the course of preparing for what I hope becomes another workshop, I stumbled upon the Chrome team meeting notes from when Chrome was being formed, right? And that's like incredibly valuable to look back at today and say, oh, what did they think they were going to be, and how did that team evolve? And just that kind of institutional knowledge to be able to go back, and even just having been at Google for 6.5 years, to kind of go back and say, oh, that's what we were thinking when we tried to do that. Like, if all I had done was like record a decision or not even taken shared notes, like, I would have no way to even remember what was going through our heads when we decided to do that. Yeah,
and on more than one occasion, the longer you've been at the startup, at some point somebody's going to ask the question, what the hell were you thinking? And you're not going to remember, because things move too quickly, there's too many other things going on, you're not going to remember the meeting or the decision or the debate. The capturing of that in real time is exceptionally valuable. So with the caveat that sometimes there are things that for legal or other reasons you want to avoid capturing, and we will tackle a legal focus in an upcoming workshop. But I think for the most part, you want to capture that stuff as a matter of course. Okay, we'll wrap it up here. Thank you to everyone who attended. We've got a workshop coming up next week on privacy. I'll do a quick pitch here for that workshop, and I mentioned this in the announcement that went out. When we did a version of this it was about 6-7 months ago, we had about 35 people sign up. To a person, the feedback that we got from people who attended was, I had no idea we had so many issues to be thinking about. Not necessarily that they were doing things wrong, but they hadn't fully appreciated the privacy implications of the data they were storing, the information that they were making available to end users, the manner in which they store information that's available to the engineers. This is an exceedingly complicated, nuanced area. It is not just about don't share personally identifiable information on the internet. I mean, there are some no-brainers here, but there's a lot of context that's important. Given the sensitivity of the topic, it is not one that will be recorded. So if you are interested, or you have people at the company who might be interested in this subject, I highly recommend having at least one person from your company attend here in person, or if you can't make it in person, to watch online. Stefan is Privacy PM at Google, an exceptional guy. His credentials in this space are top-notch, having worked at PGP on privacy and security issues for years before coming to Google. He really knows his stuff and would be happy, thrilled in fact, to hear questions from the portfolio about privacy concerns or just general, we don't quite know what we're doing or how to do it better. So strongly recommend that. Ken and I both have kids, which means we have spring break the week after that, which means we will be off. But then starting in April, we've got, I think, another 12 of these workshops identified for the month of April into May. So a lot is going to be coming up in the weeks and months ahead. And then a couple of new programs separate from workshops that we'll be talking about likely in the April to May timeframe. So with that, thanks very much for coming. We'll hopefully see you again sometime soon, and look for the feedback email in your inbox shortly. We want to know how we did and how we can get better. Thanks.